Um, you're welcome to start. We are online now.
All right, brilliant. So let's go. Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome. From wherever you are, whatever time zone right now, welcome to our webinar series, Conversations on the Arms Industry. So this is great. This is our first going to be our first episode, our first event. So it's fantastic to be launching this. My name is Philip, and I'm a project assistant at Scrap Weapons and a former international relations student at SOAS. Right now, I'm a researcher, though, based in Brussels, working on Europe-Asia relations. But what I'll do now is essentially give an overview introduction of the series and what you can expect from today's event. Then I'll pass over to my colleague, Monalisa, who will talk more about scrap weapons. So the goal of this series was to provide an insight into the arms industrial complex, where we would host open-ended conversations with actors involved in all parts of the making, the selling, monitoring, and controlling of weapons, but also those who work with communities directly affected or indirectly affected by the arms industry. So our first session was originally set to host actors within the arms manufacturing business, where we would explore their work, the challenges they faced, and their own understanding of their role in the world. We reached out to several contact points within the European arms industrial complex, but unfortunately, we're not able to get a positive response. But intertwined with our ambitions to speak with representatives from the corporate community, there was another key issue we wanted to investigate, which will be the focus of today's webinar. That is, that there are global rules that exist to ensure human safety, a key one of these being the Arms Trade Treaty, which entered into force in 2014. Yet, the question remains, in what ways are these rules being engaged with by stakeholders? And when we say stakeholders, we mean the arms manufacturing companies, but also others such as state actors, NGOs, lawyers, civil society, the academic community, members of the public, and so forth. So today, really, we'll be delving into the legal and regulatory architecture within which many of these stakeholders operate, or have the opportunity to operate. So through a conversation with our fantastic guests, we hope to get an insight into some of the rules surrounding the movement of arms around the world. This will likely springboard further questions, and whilst Monalisa and I have prepared some of our own to guide the discussion, we look forward to hearing from you, our audience, on some of these questions that you might have about this very multifaceted subject. We will try to engage with these questions as much as we can, but even if we don't get around to all of them, remember this is just the start of the conversation, and we hope to and look forward to engaging more with everyone in various ways, even after today. So to go through a little housekeeping, the webinar is being recorded and will be published on the Scrap YouTube channel in the next couple of days, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Once the speakers have given their presentations, we will open up the floor for an audience Q&A session. Please add your questions via the Q&A function, and if possible, it would be great to have your name and affiliation so that we can keep in touch, and you can start leaving questions right now. So now I will hand over to Monalisa to introduce herself and Scrap Weapons. Monalisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philip. Greetings, everyone. My name is Monalisa Hazarika, and I'm a student of Conflict Management and Development at Banaras Hindu University, India. I'm one of the leaders for tomorrow under the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs Youth for Disarmament Initiative and a project assistant at Scrap Weapons. To quickly introduce Scrap Weapons or the strategic concept for the removal of arms and proliferation project is a project that aims to reframe the debate around general and complete disarmament and is housed at the Center of International Studies and Diplomacy at SOAS University of London. Scrap Weapons set out to challenge the dominant strategic culture of production, trade, and supply of weapons that inevitably fosters new wars and which has a direct impact on safety and development conditions of critical areas of the global south. While the threat of global war looms, yet there are no practical strategies for weapons control. Scrap offers two precision tools for global weapons control, a portal to assist in tracking the world's weapons with the Global Weapons Tracking Service, and a model international agreement for the elimination of weapons of mass destruction control, and reduction of all other weaponry based on the proven best practices. These helps answer two objections to such controls, which is we would love to, but the bad guys cheat, and also we would love to, but it's just not realistic. Scrap offers the weapons equivalent to the UN framework of climate change, a framework that set out essential objectives to achieve the legal obligation of all nations to negotiate general and complete disarmament. This objective has long been set by the non-aligned movement, the US Soviet proposals and initiatives such as the President Kennedy's plan for general and complete disarmament. It combines the humanitarian principle of Will's foundational proposal during the First World War and needs of states to ensure their security. At present, Scrap Weapons is building a global constituency to request that the UN Secretariat reactivates the General Assembly's mechanism of special sessions devoted to disarmament, SSOD, and includes plans to convene the long-delayed fourth special session on disarmament of the General Assembly into the new agenda for peace. In these unprecedented times, we call on states, including our government and their representatives, to support the activation of a fourth special session on disarmament at the United Nations General Assembly. We invite everyone, as well as our partner organizations, to support this initiative by writing to the UN Secretariat their views, priorities, and potential recommendations for a new agenda of peace, which can be sent out to the interdepartmental team of the New Agenda for Peace at newagendaforpeace@un.org. You can read more about our call on Scrap Weapons website at www.scrapweapons.com and in the information pack that will be posted in the chat. Many thanks for your attention, and I now pass the floor back to Philip.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Monalisa. And I encourage everyone watching this to get engaged as much as they can with Scrap in any capacity. And we look forward to working and building on a network that we currently have. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Fahad Ahmed. So I'm going to quickly read your bio. So Fahad is currently based in Geneva and is in the International Committee of the Red Cross, legal advisor. Is a legal advisor working for the International Committee of the Red Cross, working on the universalization and national implementation of weapons-related treaties. Prior to this position, Fahad worked as the ICRC legal advisor to the African Union in Addis Ababa and the legal advisor to operations for the ICRC regional delegation for India, Bhutan, Nepal, and the Maldives. Fahad started his career with the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and subsequently worked for the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the United Nations Assistance to the Khmer Rouge trials in Cambodia, and the United Nations Development Program. His qualifications from Harvard Law School, the University of Amsterdam, and was a fellow at the United Nations University in Tokyo. He has worked and lived in Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America, and has a keen interest in multilateral humanitarian negotiations. So, Mr. Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Phil, and thanks a lot, Monalisa. Sorry for giving you such a wordy bio. My apologies. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, and on behalf of the International Committee of the Red Cross, I would like to thank Scrap Weapons and SOAS for the invitation. A few words for the people who may not know the International Committee of the Red Cross. It's an organization that started about 160 years ago and has the dual mandate of helping people affected by armed conflict and other situations of violence. And the second mandate is the promotion and development of international humanitarian law, which is also known as the law of armed conflict, and hence the ICRC's interest at the topic at hand. What I'm going to do today is to focus on some of the humanitarian consequences that we've noticed in the field. Just to begin, we know that there is a reality of widespread proliferation of arms and ammunitions, and what can happen when these arms and ammunitions are spread and they are unchecked. What it can do is it can really facilitate violations of international humanitarian law and human rights, and it affects, from our point of view, the safe delivery of humanitarian assistance to victims of armed conflict. What it also does is it prolongs insecurity, and violence in some of the most vulnerable regions of the world. And this is something that me and my colleagues have witnessed firsthand in the field in some of these regions. What it also does is that it does not only affect people while the conflict lasts. Because of the reverberating effects of these weapons, it continues to affect people even after active hostilities have ended. And this is really one of the most critical things that we have to face in many post-conflict societies as well. It's true that the idea of arms control is not very new. There have been regional mechanisms, binding regimes, such as the ECOWAS Convention on Small and Light Weapons that came about in 2006. And I had the pleasure of working on this when I was at the African Union. You have the European Union Common Position, which is binding on all EU states, which came about in 2008. And then you had the Kinshasa Convention covering many of Eastern and Central African states, which came about in 2010. There are also politically binding regimes. You have the Wassenaar Agreement, for example. You've got the Missile Technology Control Regime. And of course, you have the UN Register of Conventional Arms, which has been around since 1992. And it's basically a voluntary confidence building mechanism. So the Arms Trade Treaty is not a silver bullet, as was stated some minutes ago. It is one of the mechanisms that's available. And today I'm going to focus on that mechanism because along with Cindy, who I have the pleasure to be on the panel with, and whose organization was at the forefront of bringing the ATT into its existence, is here with me. So I'm really happy that we're able to share the stage together and discuss a few things about the Arms Trade Treaty. At present, as some of you know, there are 113 states parties, and there are 28 states that are signatories to the ATT. Now, what does the ATT do? It basically establishes a common international standard for the regulation of the international trade in conventional arms and ammunition. Okay, so very sort of concise mandate. It seeks to reduce human suffering caused by insufficient controls over trade in conventional arms. And when I say conventional arms, just to elucidate, it could be bombs, it could be rockets, it could be missiles, it could be tanks, it could be fighter jets. And the idea is also to prevent that these arms don't end up with people who could use them, A, to commit war crimes or other serious international crimes. So in a nutshell, that's what the ATT really stands for. As I said, it came about because of already existing mechanisms, but there was a need for something more global. And then you had control arms, which came into existence, which really worked hard to bring this into fruition. And hence, in 2013, this came about. And it is, now what it does is it regulates the transfer of conventional arms contributing to armed conflict, and looks at about 40% of the global arms trade, to be honest, is now governed by the ATT. So the impact is quite significant. However, despite it being around for 10 years, it still remains an urgent humanitarian imperative. And I don't think we've reached where we really wanted to reach. So there's a lot more to be done. And I thank you for organizing these events to bring to light these discussions. Today, I'm not going to concentrate on many issues. It's a big treaty. It looks at the entire process of the arms trade. From a perspective of a humanitarian like myself, I'm going to concentrate on two articles, Article 6 and Article 7 of the convention, and basically look at some of the legal debates that are around these two articles. The legal challenge with the interpretation of the treaty's core articles, and I call them core because from the humanitarian perspective, they are core, is Article 6, which deals with prohibitions, and Article 7, which deals with export, which also includes export assessments. And you will hear this word many times today. Article 6 and 7 basically act as limiting forces because they control the transfer of arms, ammunition and munitions, and parts and components. So it's quite inclusive in terms of what it covers. It basically, Article 6, commits a state party to the Arms Trade Treaty to deny a proposed transfer of arms if it would violate international obligations. So number one, or if the state has knowledge, and this is a key word that we will discuss, if the state has knowledge that the transferred weapons, that the weapons that they have transferred, would be used to commit genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes. And as you might have noticed in my past, I really dealt with many of these crimes as a war crimes prosecutor. So I really saw the impact what these weapons could have on people. For me, it was an issue which really resonated, and hence I took it upon myself and my team to work on this. Now, what's the interpretation of the word knowledge? I told you it was a key word that we would discuss today. Now, this word has been subject to different interpretation by states. You know, states like to interpret whatever suits them at times. And so some of them have tried to say, well, let's apply the subjective standard of knowledge. And this would mean the actual knowledge that we would have in our possession. However, there's also the objective standard of constructive knowledge. And what is this constructive knowledge? Constructive knowledge is where the state party ought to have known from publicly available information, from sources in the media, from civil society organizations, that the transfer would be used to commit the crimes. This is the objective standard. Now, in the position of my organization, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the state's party need to apply the objective interpretation, where they have constructive knowledge. And they should use this information to deny a transfer under Article 6.3 if they have substantial grounds to believe, based on the information that may be in their possession, that it is reasonably that these weapons would be used to commit genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes. And in our view, states may violate, for example, their obligation to prevent genocide, even though they had no certainty that the genocide was going to be committed, as long as they were aware, or normally should have been aware, that there was a serious danger that acts of genocide would be committed. And this position of the ICRC is also supported by the International Court of Justice in the genocide case, you know, the case between Serbia, Montenegro, and Bosnia. So in this case, this supposition is supported. Also, there is a good faith obligation under the Arms Trade Treaty, and therefore states should definitely apply this interpretation when implementing Article 6.3. Now, even if a state has not signed the Arms Trade Treaty, they have an obligation under Common Article 1 of the Geneva Convention to respect and ensure respect for IHL. You may only have 113 states that have ratified the Arms Trade Treaty, but all states of the world have ratified the Geneva Convention. And therefore, Common Article 1 is applicable to all parties to the Geneva Convention. And they have the responsibility to not only respect, but also ensure respect of IHL. Now, let's presume that export is not prohibited under Article 6, which we just discussed. Article 7 requires a risk assessment to apply to export. Article 7 says the states parties from authorizing exports if there is an overriding risk that arms would be used to commit or facilitate violations of IHL, international human rights law, or other serious acts. Now, again, as I told you, overriding risk also has different interpretations. However, from our perspective, the ICRC supports the understanding that an overriding risk means when something is more likely to happen than not. It's really a common sense interpretation. If it is more likely to happen than not, we need to support the humanitarian purpose. And therefore, we should deny the transfer. Now, although Article 7.7 merely encourages states to assess the authorization if it becomes aware of their new relevant information that the weapons that they've transferred or supplied are now being used to commit crimes. It needs to be operationalized because the treaty's purpose of reducing humanitarian suffering needs to be kept in mind and should be reassessed when feasible, and cancel the export authorization if there is a clear or substantial risk. So this is our interpretation of the responsibility under Article 7 of states. What we can also say is to give some pointers, and it's a non-exhaustive pointers that I'm going to talk about. When you're making this risk assessment as a state, look at the recipient's past and present practices. What have they used these weapons for? This is already a good indication. What is their record of respect for IHL and IHRL? Do they have a good record? Do they have a bad record? Is it questionable? What measures have that particular state where you're transferring these weapons to has been taken to hold offenders accountable for their violation? Is there a robust mechanism to hold accounters accountable? And how do they train their armed forces and security forces to ensure that IHL and IHRL are being respected? Do they do enough? And these would already be very good indicators for you to see whether you should be transferring these weapons to X state or not. Now, we know that just because 113 states have joined the treaty, it doesn't mean that it's enough. You need to have implementation of the treaty. The ICRC plays a key role to support states in the implementation of the treaty. We can support states when it comes to coming up with legislation which incorporates the provisions of the treaty. We can train various stakeholders on how to implement the treaty. And we can continue to raise awareness, have bilateral confidential discussions with states just to explain what are the pros and cons, obligations and rights that may come up if they decide to join the treaty. But this is something that we continue to work on. Now, today, I'm just going to sort of zoom out and zoom into another stakeholder, which are businesses, because we've talked a lot now about states, but I want to talk about businesses because the focus of this series is on the business community. And it's a shame that they're not in the room because it would be very interesting to have this conversation with them. Now, the discussion around businesses is that there's a growing momentum amongst scholars and practitioners of who look at the ATT that there should be sort of legally required mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence by companies, particularly in Europe to begin with. And there is the push for the application of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, which should apply to the defense sector. It's not really my area of expertise, so I'm not going to delve too much into the guiding principles, but if some other colleague would like to take them up, please feel free to do that. From the perspective of looking at the guiding principles and looking at IHL, would have some recommendations for the business entities. Some of these recommendations would be, it is in the interest of the business community to publicly commit to conduct business in compliance with IHL and ATT. Why not? You are not doing anything wrong. Why not publicly commit to conduct business? Where applicable? Of course, IHL is not applicable everywhere, so where applicable, publicly commit to conduct business in compliance. Adopt policies and corporate directives to commit the business, and not only just the business, but your managers and the employees to respect all laws applicable to international arms transfer, and put in place procedures and guidance to facilitate compliance. Also, put in place risk analysis and management frameworks to identify to effectively reduce risks related to international arms transfer. Now, how can you do that? You could do human rights due diligence. You can make sure that you're assessing and addressing the risk of aiding and abetting the commission of a war crime. And you could also take positive steps to promote respect for ATT and IHL. And many businesses do that, but why shouldn't the arms industry do that as well? It's also important for the arms industry to maintain effective dialogue with relevant authorities who could be, for example, customs, et cetera, when it comes to the implementation of ATT. dispense trainings, conduct internal and external reporting on the implementation of the business's commitment, as I talked about, and respect of the ATT. There should also be internal processes to deal with suspected or detected non-compliance. I think that's very, very key. And I think if companies are able to take this responsibility, then they can really strike down on non-compliance. And I think that's really very, very key. In terms of what would be the responsibility of the states? So of course, states should do everything that I've just said in order to facilitate businesses to be able to do what I've just said. So states have a responsibility to facilitate all the businesses that are incorporated within their territories. But what states can also do, for example, is to have the necessary measures, to have a national legislation to enforce the ATT. So you don't just sign it, you also implement it in spirit, and make sure that entities understand that they are covered by this treaty and the laws governing these treaties. States should also explain their expectations when it comes to meeting high standards of compliance with IHL. They might do a mandate in IHL and IHR risk analysis for management frameworks for these companies. And they should provide sufficient assistance of training, assessment, etc., so that companies don't unknowingly violate IHL and IHRL. Unknowingly, it could be purely because of ignorance. So it is the responsibility of the state to do that. There needs to be a setup of sort of timely and effective sharing of information with different entities, including civil society at times. And then this is only the responsibility of the state, is the investigation and prosecution of perpetrators of war crime. The message needs to come from the top, that this kind of violations will not be tolerated. And there needs to be individual criminal accountability for war crimes committed by company owners. It's not just enough that there is compensation, there needs to be individual criminal responsibility. And of course, for that, you'll have to develop mechanisms. And these mechanisms should only be for criminal accountability, but also for providing effective remedies to victims. I think that's really, really key, because you don't want to forget the person who's affected the most by some of these financial considerations. And companies need to, the state needs to make sure that companies do not obstruct justice, for example. And in the end, what I can say is, from what I've noticed after working on this program, that it's the spread of conventional arms is a challenge, and it's a continuous process. So this arms control is a continuous process, and no one actor can achieve it. Civil society cannot achieve it on their own. The state cannot achieve it on their own. We all need to come together to achieve it. And therefore, if we're able to carefully inspect arms exports and ensure that the end user is trained and using weapons for the right reasons other than violating IHL, we really come a long way to reduce humanitarian suffering posed by these conventional arms. And of course, civil society plays a role in doing this, but ultimately, the state parties remain responsible for applying this treaty in good faith and must place humanitarian consequences at the front of commercial considerations. I think I'll stop with that. Thank you very much.
Wow, brilliant. Thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive insight into several things. And I really like the way you highlighted some of the real challenges that are being faced, but equally some of the solutions that do currently exist. And for example, the interpretations of the laws, how really they can speak for themselves in terms of drawing attention to some of these issues and driving for that idea of responsibility from a state. And yeah, no, I definitely we've got plenty to discuss later on during the meeting, and I'd like to pull away from some of the ideas. Some of the ideas you mentioned. But yeah, well, thank you very much. Monalisa now will introduce our next speaker. So Monalisa, over to you.
Thank you, Philip. I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Natalie Goldring. Dr. Natalie Goldring is a visiting professor of the practice in the Sanford School of Public Policy at Duke University. For the last several decades, she has advised non-governmental organizations and governments on policies to control the international trade in conventional weapons and on nuclear disarmament, including as a member of the leadership team for the International Action Network on Small Arms, and as a UN consultant for the Acronym Institute for Disarmament Diplomacy, UK, and also as the founding director of BASIC's project on light weapons. She holds a PhD in political science from MIT with a specialization in defense and arms control. Without further delay, I now pass the floor to Dr. Goldring.
Thank you so much, Monalisa. And thank you, Phil. It's great to be here. I'm sorry we can't be in person, but one of the realities of COVID is that, but it allows us to be together from several continents, and I appreciate that opportunity. My task today is actually to talk about the UN Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons, which complements the ATT, or we could say the ATT complements it, as it came before the ATT being agreed back in 2001. And what I want to talk about is a bit about why it matters and how it fits in as part of this constellation of measures that's related to setting standards for and sometimes controlling the arms trade. And I'll talk about some persistent challenges we face and some things that members of civil society can do going forward. As Monalisa mentioned, I'm on the leadership team of the International Action Network on Small Arms, and I do most of my small arms work at the UN, sort of under that umbrella. But I do also represent the Acronym Institute at the UN. And IANSA is itself a network of several hundred non-governmental organizations, and the focus is on decreasing the human cost of armed violence. We're also the coordinator of civil society in the UN small arms process, which ironically includes coordinating the gun groups and their presentations to the UN, which is always a very strange part of the process. But most of what we do on the ground in affected communities. And we work to develop effective approaches for grassroots engagement. And some of the approaches we use are focusing on leadership from the affected communities. So the activities are initiated, planned, and carried out in those communities with support from us. We will present a general framework for a campaign that people in those communities can adapt for their needs. One example is our annual 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. We provide resources. People in those communities decide how to use them. In this respect, I view myself as a translator, trying to take the sometimes arcane language of the United Nations and turn it into information that's actually useful to our members. And we often connect these campaigns to dates that are already in the public eye and that can garner public and media attention. So 16 Days generally begins on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and it generally ends on Human Rights Day. So those are ways of anchoring the actions. And our members take a wide range of approaches. Some mobilize through music, some use art, some use direct political action, some focus on education and awareness raising, community building, developing alliances. And we also work to enhance connections, such as increasing youth participation, while also increasing attention to the gendered aspects of small arms and light weapons control. And if you think of that as being under the umbrella of trying to give opportunities for people in underrepresented groups to express their feelings and their positions on these issues, that gives you a good overall sense of that. So the program of action is in the UN's form. They don't believe in short titles generally. The UN Program of Action to prevent, combat, and eradicate the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons in all its aspects. As I said, it came about in 2001, just before the 9/11 attacks. It was accepted by consensus. So all of the countries in the UN committed to it. And it's politically binding, but it's not legally binding. And it matters in part because it put the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons on the international agenda. But the real reason it matters is because it includes ways that we can decrease the human costs of armed violence. And that's that's the reason to be here, right? The Small Arms Survey estimates that we're losing more than 500,000 people a year as a result of armed violence. This was before the war in Ukraine, and they say already that, you know, it was likely an understatement. These are people who lost their lives as the direct result of armed violence. This doesn't include indirect deaths. It doesn't include people who are injured or displaced. And so one of the things that we do is to ensure that the voices of survivors are heard to help counter some of these problems. And there's signs of progress. The initial program of action framework was limited in some respects, but subsequent meetings, there's a biennial meeting, obviously every 2 years, and there's a review conference every 6. Those have helped update the consideration of these issues. And we've included issues that hadn't been covered originally or hadn't been covered adequately, and issues that have become more prominent in the more than 20 years since its approval. And these conferences and their outcome documents give policy options at national levels, regional, global levels. So, for example, in recent meetings, there's been a focus on individual states setting their own national targets, in addition to the other commitments they've made through the POA and other instruments. One prominent example is gender. The word was not in the original program of action. Now there are regular references to the full, equal, meaningful, and effective participation of women, clear indications that mere numbers aren't sufficient, and there are a number of measures that would in fact enhance both what we know about the gendered effects of armed violence and the policy options for dealing with that. That said, there are also persistent challenges. One is that in the UN, consensus tends to be defined as unanimity. So a small number of states can block progress if they choose. One is limited attention to the effects of small arms and light weapons in non-conflict settings. POA tends to focus on conflict and post-conflict. Another one is that the diverse instruments, the ATT, the POA, the firearms protocol, the regional agreements, they're not systematically linked, and they need to be. An important problem is the lack of full implementation of states' political commitments. Sometimes this is because they simply don't have the funding, the resources to carry them out. From the perspective of civil society, a huge problem is our frequent exclusion from the conversations, where our conversations often have to take place in the hallways. In terms of ways forward, one thing we can do is demonstrate our resilience. So despite the continued challenges resulting from COVID, for example, our net members keep working on all levels, local, national, regional, global. And when one's blocked, we try to find another. So we're doing a lot of work at local and national levels to try and supplement what's happening at the regional and global levels. We work to magnify our effects by working in coalition at all of these levels, and by seeking support both from governments and from non-traditional allies. We work within the UN structure where possible and outside when necessary. And sometimes we have to work around the system. So we've worked hard to convince chairs of these various conferences that they should exercise their right to call for votes from time to time. And that provision is in the actual procedures, rules of procedure for the original program of action. And some strong chairs have done that. And that's made it clear to the handful of skeptics that they're not going to be able to dominate the process. And last but not least on that score, we can use and implement the strong texts that have come out of these conferences, the review conference and the biennial meetings of states, by, for example, continuing to work with states to set ambitious national targets to supplement the targets that are already in the program of action. And the idea there is that these targets can be customized to particular states' needs. But here too, as Fahad said, it's a question of implementation. Otherwise, it's words on paper. And we need to continue to press governments to actually meet their commitments under these instruments, because it's there. If we implemented the ATT fully and we implemented the program of action fully, there would be a sea change in global weapons transfers. And we need to do that. because the bottom line in the end is, are we decreasing the number of people who are dying or being injured or being displaced as a result of the use of these weapons? As an old mentor of mine, Frank Blackaby, said many years ago, what are we doing to stop the killing? And that question needs to be foremost. And we welcome your help. That's a really quick overview, and I'd welcome any questions as we go along. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Goldring, for your brief yet very informative lecture on the program of action and also highlighting your work to reduce gun-related violence both in conflict and post-conflict situations. I truly appreciate your point on the dire need to provide opportunities to underrepresented groups in the sphere, including increasing youth participation and also focusing on gender aspects of small arms and light weapons control. Like you mentioned, it is indeed essential that sometimes we need to work around the system to achieve and also to answer the question, what are we doing to reduce gun-related violence? So thank you so much. I now pass the floor back to Philip to introduce our next speaker.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Monalisa. And the next speaker is Ms. Cindy Ebbs. So again, I'm going to read through the bio. Ms. Ebbs has worked in the field of public international law and policy for almost 20 years in areas such as human rights and humanitarian law, transitional justice, arms control, and humanitarian disarmament. Cindy has joined Control Arms in New York, first as coordinator of the ATT legal project during the Arms Trade Treaty negotiations in 2012, and continued as legal consultant and senior policy advisor. After working with the Public International Law and Policy Group and the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots, Ms. Ebbs returned to Control Arms and is now co-director, where she sets policy priorities, designs programs, drafts legal and policy briefs, and coordinates and conducts advocacy in support of the universalization and implementation of the ATT. Ms. Ebbs is also an experienced commercial litigator and licensed to practice law in New York. She earned her JD from Georgetown University Law Center, her MA in International Affairs from American University's School of International Service, and her MPA from New York University's Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. Ms. Ebbs also earned her BA from Davidson College. All right, so without further ado, the floor is over to you.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Monalisa, and thank you to Scrap Weapons for having invited me here today to be on this panel with my friends and colleagues, Fahad and Natalie. It's as Natalie mentioned, I think having this in person would have been amazing. But again, the reach that we can get with these kinds of webinars, both live and subsequently through recording, I think is really amazing, and one of sort of the positives that's come out of these last challenging 3 years. And and honestly, like, I don't hear bios of my colleagues as much, and I'm like even more impressed by my two colleagues and their bios and all of the experience that they bring to the table here. I want to start with just saying that, kind of framing what I'll provide here. And as Fahad was going through his, we anticipated there would probably be some duplication. So what I've been doing is sort of trying to adjust my my comments accordingly. And I'm grateful to Fahad for going through a lot of the nitty gritty, as one says, with Articles 6 and 7 of the Arms Trade Treaty. So what I'm going to do is provide a little bit more of a perspective of civil society on the Arms Trade Treaty with some additional pieces. I will talk about Article 6 and 7 because Control Arms agrees with the ICRC that this is indeed the heart of the treaty. And then I will try to kind of talk about a couple of other aspects of the treaty just to get a little bit of a broader sense of what it entails. And then I'm really going to try to be brief because I'm looking forward to the conversation and the questions that we can kind of debate and discuss subsequent to these presentations. I have developed a quick PowerPoint. So if you could indulge me, I'm going to share my screen with my limited technical abilities, but fingers crossed, here we go. Okay. Share. And hold on. Slideshow. Have we done it? Have we done it? Oh, I think we've done it.
Yes. No.
Fabulous. Okay. So I'm obviously going to be talking about the Arms Trade Treaty. Before the ATT entered into force on December 24th of 2014, there were more international laws in the world regulating the trade of bananas than the arms trade. At the time, there were no international global frameworks for the trade in arms. Of course, the POA, the political commitment was in full force and focusing on small arms and light weapons. This and the other instruments that Fahad mentioned earlier really kind of paved the way for bringing the ATT into existence. At the time, there was really nothing, though, to regulate the vast and intricate global trade in conventional weapons or its effects on conflict and armed violence, peace, and development. So for many years, civil society had recognized this deficiency and called for global action. In 1997, a group of 19 eminent persons and institutions that had received the Nobel Peace Prize, including Oscar Arias and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, launched an international code of conduct on arms transfers. And this initiative made its way to the UN a few years later with key support from the permanent mission of Costa Rica in New York. After 2 preparatory sessions, and in 2012, the UN held a 4-week conference on the Arms Trade Treaty, followed by another final negotiation session in 2013, since no agreement could be reached in 2012. And during these negotiation sessions, the Control Arms Coalition continued to present the case for a bulletproof treaty by pushing for the inclusion of key provisions like a robust risk assessment that includes gender-based violence as a criteria. And states agreed to this. For the first time ever in an international treaty, the term gender-based violence now appears as a part of the ATT risk assessment. The ATT sets common international standards for the transfer of conventional arms and ammunition with the express purpose of reducing human suffering. The frame of the Arms Trade Treaty is remarkable in that, pardon me, hold on, in that it, sorry, friends, just a minute. Of course. In that it sets common international standards for the transfer of arms and ammunition with the express purpose of reducing human suffering. It is the first of its kind to take as its point of departure that responsible arms transfers are a humanitarian imperative. The ATT addresses all aspects of the international arms trade, the export, import, transit, transshipment, and brokering of the 7 major conventional weapons groups. And those include, as Fahad mentioned earlier, here, and they're listed here for your review. Also, the first that are set out here: battle tanks, armored combat vehicles, large caliber artillery systems, combat aircraft, attack helicopters, warships, missiles and missile launchers, and parts and components and ammunition, as well as small arms and light weapons. And this inclusion of small arms and light weapons was something at the negotiations that was critical, and also the inclusion of ammunition that were both hard-fought victories in terms of getting these things into the treaty. Sorry, just one second. Let me go back and figure out how to go back. One moment, please. Oh my goodness. Can we go around? I don't know. One second. Sorry, guys.
No
I knew this was gonna happen. 1 second. Let me see if I can fix this. You know what? Let's just carry on without the PowerPoint, shall we?
You may be able to exit slideshow and then click on the slide you want to go back to.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. It's one of
If
these
you
things
want
that
to go ahead, that's fine as well.
I
Yeah.
think I'll just go ahead for time. So, and then maybe I can fix this during the Q&A, and I can then show you guys some of the cooler slides. Some of them are cool, some of them are less cool. So anyway, so the ATT really represents a significant paradigm shift in the world of arms control. And that is for a lot of the reasons that Fahad said, through its prohibitions of certain arms transfers in Article 6 and the establishment of the detailed export assessment mechanism in Article 7. And all of these critically are tied to existing international human rights and humanitarian law. And this is why these prohibitions and acquired risk assessment are the heart of the treaty. And this is why the ATT is a humanitarian treaty with a humanitarian imperative. So Article 6, I won't go through the details because Fahad did such a great job earlier, does outline the circumstances where states parties must deny a proposed arms transfer. And I wanted to highlight the point that Fahad made about constructive knowledge, and that this concept of knowledge and what the state knows before the transfer is going to take place about potential violations that were happening in the recipient country. And this idea of constructive knowledge is really critical, frankly, to the implementation of this Article 6 and the prohibitions, because it is it makes the most sense, and it broadens the scope of Article 6. And I'm happy to say that as of this year, with the ICRC's very consistent and persistent engagement in the Arms Trade Treaty process, constructive knowledge after 10 years has now reached recognition in some of the guidance documents that hopefully will be agreed upon during this year's Conference of States Parties. And that is, we work closely with the ICRC, but they have led on this issue and led quite successfully, and we appreciate that. Article 7, the risk assessment that applies only to exporting countries, if the prohibitions thresholds are not met, is also the most critical, as we see it, element of this treaty. And to kind of highlight pieces of that, to complement what Fahad said about Article 7, I want to mention that not only does Article 7, or the risk assessment, require states to assess whether the arms that are going to be transferred are going to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law or international human rights law, it also requires an assessment of whether or not the arms to be transferred will be used to commit or facilitate offenses relating to terrorism and or transnational organized crime. And these I bring up also because not only does the ATT apply in conflict situations, such as when the laws of war are in effect, but it also applies in non-conflict situations, in situations of armed violence, in situations of terrorism. And these are really critical aspects, and really to sort of understand the really broad scope of the Arms Trade Treaty. I will say in its 10 years of existence, there's been less attention to how the Article 7 does indeed work together on issues of terrorism and issues of organized crime. And that is sort of starting to come to the fore a little bit more, but really, I think getting it to the issues of IHL and international human rights law, there's still work to be done, and we're still quite focused on that as well. The other aspect that's interesting about the Article 7 risk assessment is that it also requires states to consider mitigation measures that might be able to lower the risk that they may have identified. And this is important for a couple of reasons. One, I guess sort of on the more cynical side, it kind of allows for states parties who really want to transfer the weapons to kind of say, well, we can transfer it as long as we, make sure that we have conversations with the recipient, and that everything seems above board. And luckily, the interpretation, and also supported by the ICRC, of what mitigation measures are, is that mitigation measures must be effective, and they must be effective with respect to the transfer at issue. So this is the kind of thing where it's not just mitigation measures across the board. It has to really affect the risk identified and in connection with the weapons that will be transferred. The other interesting thing I think about mitigation measures is it allows for importing states and transit and transshipment states to enter into the conversation. There are a lot of conversations about the Arms Trade Treaty. A lot of states parties and non-states parties say, well, this is an exporters treaty. This is something where, you know, why do we as importers, we don't export, we don't have manufacturing in our country, and we don't really see the need to really engage in this conversation. The ATT is designed actually for information exchange, and this inclusion of mitigation measures requires the exporting state to engage with the importing state and transit and transshipment states to make sure that these weapons are going from point A to point B without diversion and without misuse. The other, let's see. I think I'll move on from Article 6 and 7 because I think, again, Fahad did such a great job of kind of outlining those, and I'm sure we can talk about those in the Q&A. But diversion is also a key element of the Arms Trade Treaty, and that's set out in an article called Article 11. And there is a risk assessment that must be applied to prevent diversion of the transfer of arms, but not of ammunition or parts and components. So again, you see sort of in these negotiating sessions, there are limitations to the Arms Trade Treaty, but we focus on the positive aspects and making sure that the implementation of the positive aspects are done. Then we can work on the stuff that we might want to continue to work on. There's always work. Nevertheless, the risk assessment for diversion is not as specific as the risk assessment relating to IHL or to international human rights law, organized crime, or terrorism, but it is indeed a requirement. Article 11.2, which covers diversion, requires the exporting state party to seek to prevent the diversion of the transfer of conventional arms, but with no additional specificity on how to do this, save for using its national control system and through the establishment of mitigation measures. And these mitigation measures can be similar to those referenced in the context of Article 6 and 7, but again, they have to be tailored to the risk that has been identified and the arms that will be transferred. Oftentimes with diversion situations, one of the mitigation measures that will be implemented and that I think the Arms Trade Treaty and its states parties see as an effective implementation is end use cooperation. And this is really talking about important information about the end user, including the type and quantity of arms being transferred, as well as its intended end use. And these kinds of things are outlined and have been discussed by the Conference of States Parties in a little bit more detail than I think some of the conversations about Article 6 and 7 in terms of implementation. So the issue of diversion has been addressed by the Conference of States Parties in the last 10 years. And of course, as everything, will continue to need consistency and addressing. But they've come a pretty long way in terms of really sort of trying to operationalize these kinds of diversion risk assessments. A few additional key facts about the treaty. The ATT is implemented on the national level. So with the establishment of a national control system and a national competent authority to implement that control system. So meeting their obligations set by the treaty, national governments design and implement their own systems. So this kind of flexibility allows for the treaty to apply to all states in the arms transfer chain, and allows them to focus on the aspects of the treaty that impact their country and their region more specifically. And so it's really a bottom-up approach that's fueled by the effective information exchange and transparency. And another point to note about the Arms Trade Treaty is that there is no internal accountability mechanism for the treaty, like an arbitration panel or an ombudsman, and there's no stated ability to refer states parties to the International Criminal Court or any other judiciary body. Initial and annual reporting requirements promote transparency in the international arms trade, and are meant to keep states up to date and to ensure that they do report on what's happening with their imports and exports. But again, there is no internal accountability mechanism. So before, during, and now, before and now, after the entry into force of the Arms Trade Treaty, Control Arms has been working to stop irresponsible arms transfers that fuel conflict and armed violence. Within the ATT process, much has been done to develop the structures for diversion, as I mentioned, and less attention has been placed on the risk assessment. And we see the risk assessment as the heart of the treaty and its humanitarian imperative. And so we are redoubling our efforts this year to support states in sharing their risk assessment processes to foster a community of practice to strengthen this critical aspect of the treaty. I also lastly want to mention, as Fahad mentioned, is this concept of industry and how does industry play into the implementation of the ATT. The ATT is states parties are those who sign the ATT and those who have responsibilities under the ATT specifically. However, industry, as you know, plays a huge role in the arms transfer system and in the international arms trade. And as it happens this year, the president of the Conference of States Parties has chosen industry as its thematic focus. This has been an interesting conversation so far. I will say with the Arms Trade Treaty, sort of the culmination of its year is at the end of August. So we're kind of like in the middle of our work in terms of our sort of annual work. But this key focus is really an opportunity to incorporate sort of cooperation between industry and states with regard to the Arms Trade Treaty, and also to incorporate and flesh out what the responsibilities of industry are in this context, whether or not they stem from the Arms Trade Treaty or they stem from other international institutions and other international instruments, such as the guiding principles on human rights. And this is, I will say, a featured discussion this year. And unfortunately, this featured discussion has only been featured because of civil society's pushing of really saying, you know, we can talk to industry, but the approach of the presidency was initially really just talking about sort of efficiencies that industry and states could have with regard to the Arms Trade Treaty, and inviting industry in and almost sort of incentivizing them to engage in the Arms Trade Treaty. And we at Control Arms and with other civil society organizations have really been working to say, you know, this is about responsibility. It's not about efficiency. And we need to keep that at the forefront of this conversation. We certainly encourage industry to get involved in the implementation of the ATT, and they are really critical because it's not just arms manufacturers, it's freight forwarders, it's insurance companies, it's a multitude of industry actors that really play into this international arms, into the international arms trade. So getting those voices in to understand what their needs are in order to implement the Arms Trade Treaty is a critical function. But we really need to make sure that there is responsibility both on states parties' perspectives and on the industry to make sure that the humanitarian imperative of the Arms Trade Treaty is realized. And I'll stop there. Thank you so much. Look forward to the questions.
Wow, brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you all speakers. I think we got a really comprehensive insight, and at least I did. And this is a treaty, well, especially the Arms Trade Treaty, but even the POA. I mean, these are frameworks which you're initially skeptical about. You're like, yeah, well, what are their binding features? But you realize that there is a lot of comprehension to each of them, and they really do force states to see how these norms, these important norms, like the humanitarian norms that exist, are not a choice that they can take lightly. They can't decide to engage with that or not really. But again, norms are a big part of this whole process. And so, before we get on to some of the guiding questions, and again, we've got a question in the chat, which is really great to see. And actually, before that, I wanted to say for any of our viewers, definitely reach out to all of our or check out our speakers' organizations, their websites, all the work that they're doing. I really encourage getting more involved in other actors within this field and learning from them and seeing how you can get involved as well, because I imagine we'll have a lot of questions about, you know, how can civil society get more involved, how can young people get more involved, things like this. So definitely check that out. So essentially, what I wanted to perhaps clarify, because what's fantastic about the treaty, as I mentioned, is that it sounds very comprehensive for those who are already engaging with the Arms Trade Treaty. And then equally for the POA, the conferences there, it's fantastic. We've already got people engaging with those issues. But again, there's that number there of 40% of the weapons currently in the world are, are covered within these frameworks, these mechanisms, but there's still large numbers that are not. There's still state actors that are not, getting involved in the ways that they should perhaps. And really what strikes me from what you've been saying is that it's about helping them understand the responsibilities they have, helping them understand the important role that they play, why this issue is important. And from my own experience, it's a lot about those interactions that happen. Can you get people in the same room together, really understanding each other and understanding why these things are so important, and why it's #1 of the Geneva Convention. I mean, there's a reason for that. So what I want to ask from all of your experiences is what kind of spaces should be or can be created to ensure that we've got really inclusive discussions going on. Dr. Goldring, you were talking about the real civil society focus there, but when does that engage with the states, for example? And then Ahmed, you were speaking about talking directly with the states, but when do you engage with the arms industry themselves and to what capacity? And tying it back to kind of Scrap's wider idea of bringing the conversation into bigger and bigger forums with the launch of a special session on disarmament. Could this huge space be that opportunity really for these discussions, these interactions between stakeholders? You talked about the ATT conference coming up. I wanted to ask, are those arms industry actors, are they going to be at the table? Are they in the room as well? Are they in those corridors having those discussions with civil society? How can we foster that kind of space? How have you seen it fostered when it works, where you think it could work? That is my starting conversation question, and then Monalisa will guide us through the next few. But yeah, thank you very much. And again, feel free to jump in, any of you. You can just go, or you can either go through order of the speaker, or if anyone wants to step in first, that's brilliant.
I don't mind stepping in first unless one of my other panelists would like to. Yeah. Usually this is not the coveted position, but I will say, just because you're bringing up in terms of the Arms Trade Treaty and the Conference of States Parties, just to clarify and give some background, the Conference of States Parties every year takes place towards the end of August. This year it will be the week of August 21st, 21st. And we also have 2 sets of working groups that happen during the year. And we had one that went on in February, and we'll have another one just coming right up in the beginning of May. I believe it's in a week's time. And I'm lucky, hopefully I will see Fahad there in Geneva. So it's interesting. You say, is industry involved? I mean, so even before, I would say before we had this thematic focus of this year on industry, industry was not involved in these kinds of conversations. Whether they're involved in sort of other conversations sort of outside of this process, they were definitely not involved in the process. And that's not because they weren't invited. There is in the treaty space for civil society and industry. The terminology in the treaty is always civil society and industry. So this is not a situation where they haven't been invited. They just haven't chosen to engage. I think the focus of the presidency, which is held by the Republic of Korea, is to try to increase this engagement for the reasons I laid out earlier. But to date, it's not really happening. There's been about 1 or 2 industry actors who have engaged in person in the working group so far. I don't expect to see a lot of industry actors at the second group of working groups that will take place in a week's time. We actually just had a virtual meeting yesterday concerning with the president, Ambassador Yoon, and other organizations that are trying to engage with industry on this topic. And there were a few industry people on that call, not many, not much sort of interaction on the call with industry happened. So I think it's sort of in its nascent stages. I think it's something that should be looked at and encouraged. But I will say, from a civil society perspective, and I think Natalie certainly will agree with me here, is that it is a challenge and a fight all the time to get into the room, to have civil society's views understood, listened to, and taken into account. And that's a fight that we choose to fight all the time. And we do it with we do it gladly in a lot of ways. One of the cool things about the Arms Trade Treaty is that because civil society pushed so much during the rules of procedure, that civil society actually has a voice in the Arms Trade Treaty process, such that it is involved in all of the meetings, and it can raise its flag and speak at any time. And that is unusual if you're looking at a lot of the international instruments where civil society is involved, but it's a lot more limited. So this is definitely achievement, but I think more can be said. And so I guess ultimately, I think it would be great to have this industry conversation. I think they need to look at their responsibilities as well as the benefits of being a part of the ATT. And I also think that states parties should remember that civil society also requires space, and that industry space and encouragement that they want to give to industry should not eclipse the position and the attention and the understanding that states parties have of civil society. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, no, thank you very much. And I mean, just off the top of that as well, and the others can maybe think about this in your responses, this idea of being in the room as a member of civil society. I wonder the spaces outside of the room. So what we try to do in this webinar series with various levels of success is kind of create those opportunities outside of the room, the state-dominated areas where you can have these engagements between civil society and industry. And that's something which actually I've seen a lot of young people as well are being more and more interested in. How can we crack that, especially in this very corporatized world that we live in, where all of us, are going to university and then ending up working very often in large companies. There is this link now between civil society, the public, and the industry side of things. How can these be fostered? What kind of spaces could be created even? And how could young people, even through their careers perhaps, vote with their careers in that respect? So yeah, maybe something for the other speakers to address. Yeah, Fahad, yeah, you had your hand.
Thanks, Phil, and it's obviously excellent to listen to Natalie and Cindy sort of cover almost all the aspects of it very comprehensively. I mean, I'm just going to pick up on what you have asked in your second question, and I think it's very, very important that we realize that these conversations need to happen not just at the global level like we do in Geneva or in New York, not just at the regional level at the African Union or the European Union, but at the level of the state, at the level of in the country itself. And it needs to be grassroots organizations, it needs to be universities that need to organize these events and discussions with all stakeholders, be it industry, be it different government authorities. Many times, because the Arms Trade Treaty is such a comprehensive treaty and it covers a plethora of ministries and departments. So sometimes the ICRC, for example, which has presence globally in Geneva, in New York, but also in about 90 countries physically, what we really like doing is to organize a state consultation. to sit down with the relevant ministries to bring together the people who are affected and just have a conversation. We are the conveners of the conversation. We are the facilitators of the conversation. But these kind of conversations, you don't need an ICRC to organize it. They can be organized by people who are affected, by victims groups, by communities, by people who have an interest at stake. And therefore, I'm really encouraged by what you're saying. But what also needs to be explained to states, and I think that's really crucial, that this does not limit you to procure and buy weapons for legitimate reasons. The only restriction that it puts on you is to procure weapons for the wrong reasons, and therefore you shouldn't be doing it for the wrong reasons in any case, okay, either exporting or importing. And therefore, there is a need to demystify. It should be treated like any other trade, but it needs to be dealt with responsibly. I think responsibility is the key word here. And that accountability comes from national mechanisms more than international mechanisms. So our focus, my focus is always go local as long as we are able to have a good system in place at the state level with the authorities. I think that really works wonders, bringing all the right ministries and stakeholders together. So if there are people who are looking to work in the disarmament arena, if there are people who are looking, I would say, yes, this is a very, very interesting area of law and policy to look into, to practice. By all means, familiarize yourself with these ideas, understand and demystify them if you have the capacity to your state and to the right authorities, write articles about it, say that it does not stop any legitimate trade, but it stops when these weapons are being used for the wrong purposes. So there's a need to demystify it. I totally agree with you that 40% is too little. We need to have 100% coverage of all trade, obviously. And that's why it's the endeavor of all of us here to universalize these values. And it doesn't matter what shape these values take, whether they take the instrument is the ATT or the POA, it's the value, it's the norm that's important. And I think the idea is to universalize the norm. And the other role that people can play is at the level of implementation. Now, implementation of international humanitarian law is a journey, okay? It's a journey that takes a long time. And you need to accompany your state and your people on this journey together. You need to chip in where you can in this massive journey. It will take them years to pass a good legislation. It will take them years to train the right people. And therefore, being academics, being experts in these certain areas, you can provide them expertise on X area or Y area. You don't need to be able to provide them all the expertise because it's too comprehensive. But being present in a country is extremely important. And therefore, the ICRC exam, for example, is pushing for the inclusion of the National Red Cross and Red Crescent societies because they are always within the state. They stay there. They are incorporated there. And therefore, they have physical presence throughout. And they can be conveners who can work with civil society, who can work with many actors to keep this going, to keep the conversation going. And I think that's very important. Also, what's in the third point, and then I'll stop, is just to say that treaties, and because I follow many weapons-related treaties, treaties have a trajectory of ratification and acceptance. Within the first 10 years, the spike is huge. It's more and more states. There's the political movement. States are interested, so you have many states joining it. But then after 10 years, there's a lull. And therefore, it is extremely important for us to make sure this lull does not mean that states now lose interest in this extremely important humanitarian imperative. And we keep the fire burning. And that's why congratulations to Scrap Weapons to keep this fire burning and to bring this idea, these norms to many people. Thank you very much.
Perhaps through a special session on disarmament. Exactly. Really fantastic. And Natalie, if you want to pick up from that.
Absolutely. I have several points. I'll try to make them briefly. The first is I see the ATT and the POA as being highly complementary. And one of the things that the POA can do is that it does have 100% coverage. all of the countries of the UN committed to it. And so that's something to keep in mind as part of the framework. One issue we haven't talked about is money. Industry doesn't do this for fun. They do this to make money, and that profit motive is there, and it biases the judgment. I remember many years ago, a guy who was a lobbyist for the Aerospace Industries Association in the US just blithely described his job as selling heavy metal to the world. And his point was that the government sets the constraints and they're supposed to work within them. Now, the extent to which they do is a whole nother question, but the governments play that role. The governments have to set the limits. The governments have to exercise judgment. The governments need to follow the laws they've already passed, right? In the United States, we've got screens for human rights. We are not supposed to sell weapons to countries that systematically abuse the human rights of their citizens. We document those human rights abuses in the State Department's reports, generally issued annually, and then we turn around and still sell weapons to those countries because we claim their overriding interests. We need to flip that. The presumption globally and nationally needs to be no sale, right? No should be the first answer, and then you make the case. Right now, the presumption in many countries, absolutely including my own, is that the sale will go through, and we need to flip that script. On the money issue, that's also relevant to NGOs, right? To be in the room, to be at the table, you have to have funding. And, you know, for youth, for victims, for survivors, that funding is very, very hard to come by. It's hard to come by for all of us, right? And when it is there, it's often for projects rather than for the sustained multi-year support that these organizations and the individuals need in order to do this work. These are not problems going to be solved overnight. There is no one magic approach. But if we have a wider variety of voices in the room, that's going to make a difference. IANSA has made a point of bringing survivors to these conferences. And you see the difference in the tone of the room when these people are speaking. Almost without exception, I did see a gentleman from the Heritage Foundation texting throughout a heartfelt account by the parent of one of the victims at Sandy Hook. Almost without exception, you see a different level of interest and attention from the delegates because those stories matter, right? Storytelling matters, but those stories need to be told by the people who are affected, you know, not by me. And we have models and we have recent models, right? The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is a great example. Youth leadership, incredibly important in TPMW. Support for civil society and civil society inclusion, much greater than what we have in the ATT or the POA. And the ATT is markedly better than the Program of Action because the Program of Action's rules of procedure were agreed in 2001 and have not been changed. They are adopted as part of the initial process of each of these conferences. And so that's an issue. You talked about spaces, Phil. We need to be looking at the connections among these issues. One example, and then I'll stop. Development is a key example. You can't have development effectively with rampant armed violence. You have to be looking at those issues together. And traditionally, they're in different silos. But when we look at the most critical issues in our world, they overlap. You want to look at major conventional weapons? Sure, they're involved in virtually all of the current conflicts today. But those people are back, you know, the people who are being killed by small arms and light weapons. Those small arms and light weapons are often backed up by people in tanks and aircraft and the heavier weapons that Cindy was talking about. The connections matter. But you got to be in the room to, you know, or at least on the outskirts of the room. Cindy and I have spent plenty of time on the couches in the hallways of the UN, but you've got to be where you can have those conversations. And many states in the UN have used COVID as an excuse to exclude civil society. And we've had much more difficulty getting access just to the building than was the case 3 years ago. So I'll end on that point.
Yeah, Monalisa, if you wanted to step in as well, if you had any other follow-ups or questions.
No, I'll definitely keep my question for now after Ms. Ebbs maybe go
I just have a quick follow-up to what Natalie was saying. Is I wholeheartedly agree with everything that she said, and one of the things that I was thinking about kind of as we were preparing for this is, you know, the question, Phil, that you had is, you know, how can you know, the arms trade treaty sort of be intersected with more people's careers and professions, and Natalie really brought this point up, which is the arms trade treaty and arms control more sort of broadly intersects with every area and everything. So if you're interested in international human rights law, if you're interested in IHL, if you're interested in development, if you're interested in any of these kinds of movements, this is critical. The control of arms is critical. It's not just disarmament, it's humanitarian disarmament. The point of disarmament is not, it does not have there's a humanitarian point to it. It's to reduce human suffering. And that gets lost in a lot of the conversations with states parties, a lot of the conversations with industry, as Natalie mentioned, it's money, you know, and that's what Natalie's organization, IANSA and Control Arms, look to make sure is at the forefront, or that these voices, the voices of people affected by armed violence and conflict, are heard directly on these platforms, and that we as sort of larger coalitions can support our members, our organization members who, as Fahad mentioned, are grassroots members. They are local organizations who are working with survivors and with those others affected by armed violence directly, that they have enough support, financial support, and other support to keep the lights on effectively. So I just wanted to reiterate those points, and thanks, Natalie, for bringing all that up. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And again, this point about demystifying, maybe think of destigmatizing as well. And there's this kind of idea, I think, that you just need this the business to keep going. You know, that ultimately these companies need to make their turnovers. But when you really bring it into light of the fact that there are these laws which exist, it really, like this idea of saying like, no, but then let's check. I think really just kind of snaps people back into focus, being like, well, no, this is not this process out of our control, but actually there is this responsibility that does exist. And each of us, you know, this is what you're talking about, listening to the stories of survivors as well. When you really look at the face of it, the impact of these things, you cannot help but be moved, really. And yeah, and again, we're talking about this idea of due diligence as well. Yeah, looking at those career spaces. I think a lot of people, especially in the environmental movement, are very interested with ESGs, the role that plays in accountability of companies. And I think, you know, that can equally be applied in many ways to this industry as well. And it's about really within the opportunities you have, finding those connections, finding where those points of change that you can make can really happen. Yeah, I mean, Monalisa, I don't know if you wanted to jump in with any further points there, any other questions you had?
Yes, thank you, Philip, and all the speakers for your wonderful presentations. I think everybody just summarized what I was about to say, that of course it's very easy to get lost in the technical jargon, but of course we need to keep looking at the intersectional approaches to this field in general. But my question is, I guess, something more personal, but something that I've always wanted to ask people who are working in this sphere, is that what inspired you to work in the field of arms control, and how difficult or easy was it to find opportunities? Of course, this is in view with the limited opportunities available in the Global South, with most of the internships and other paid engagements of major organizations in this field are based in cities like New York, Vienna, and Geneva. Also, since all of our speakers are representing different organizations today, I, on behalf of all the youth that are who have joined us today, and also who will be watching the recording later on, would like to ask you what are the different opportunities that are available at your organization for early career professionals or recent graduates. So speakers, over to you.
Maybe I can. Maybe I can
Go ahead,
start.
Fahad.
Maybe I can start with that. No, thank you very much for that question. And I think, and I'm always looking for bright young people to join the ICRC. So this is a thank you for giving me this opportunity. I think there are opportunities. Those opportunities at times in different countries are few and far between. It is true, but that doesn't mean that there are not opportunities. So for example, the ICRC has about 90 delegations across the world, and in every delegation that we have, or most delegations, we have a position for a training. And this traineeship is paid by the ICRC. It's obviously not a full-time job, but it covers your basic costs. And it is usually, depending on the country that we are in, it's about 3 to 6 months, but it can also be up to 1 year. And it's really an excellent opportunity to see the work of the ICRC. Obviously, depending on the context you are, the kind of work that you do would be different. So you will not have the same work in Brussels as you would in Colombia, and that is to be expected because it depends on the context, it depends on the operations of the ICRC in that place. There's also about 9 associate positions that we have for people who are still studying, and these positions are based in Geneva, and we have a push to ensure that the Global South is represented. And therefore, we do not look at experiences in internships in New York and Geneva as, we don't put them on a higher pedestal. We don't, because we understand that not everybody is able to self-fund them and go to New York or go to Geneva. And therefore, we do not consider them to be a contributing factor, but we do look at your train of thought, how you applied yourself. So for example, Monalisa, in New Delhi, you would have the Indian Society of International Law, which would give you opportunities to work on issues of arms control, international humanitarian law, refugee law, etc. So it gives you these opportunities in India as well. And I've been an alumni of the Indian Society of International Law and have also taught there. So it's one of the things that we encourage. There are fewer and fewer positions, so to speak, but in the larger sphere, there are many positions. Civil society organizations, the International Campaign for the Abolishment of Nuclear Weapons. If you broaden your search, you will find opportunities, and the idea is to contribute in any way that you can. It could be by writing a paper to begin with, and then it could culminate into something a bit more interesting. It could become an internship, it could become a traineeship, and ultimately it could become a position. But the idea is to keep the interest in the position. And just while I have the floor, I just saw that Lucy Plummer has posted a question, and we've not been able to address it. So all I wanted to say to Lucy, we read your question. It's quite, there are many layers to it, and I wish I had the time to answer that. But what I can say is that definitely from the perspective of IHL, every principle of IHL is balanced on what you call a fine balance between humanity and military necessity. Unfortunately, the ICRC has not been able to find this balance when it comes to the use of nuclear weapons. And therefore, the ICRC, along with many others, has called for a complete ban on nuclear weapons because we do not think that these nuclear weapons can be used in a way where you can distinguish between a military objective and a civilian. And therefore, since you cannot apply the principle of distinction, it does not meet the test of IHL, and therefore it needs to be completely banned. And ICRC normally does not talk about banning unless and until they've done the background research on the impact. And therefore, we've not come across any evidence that nuclear weapons can be used in a discriminatory manner, and therefore they should be completely banned. What you as youth can do is to put pressure on your states by writing, by petitioning, by moving as much as you can, and explain that this is something that we need to get rid of completely. If your state has signed it, make sure that they implement it when it comes to victim assistance, etc., etc. There's a lot of literature on the ICRC and many other websites that you can find. And my suggestion would be to make sure that you say it loud and clear that this is not something that will be tolerated in either your state or any of your allied states, for that matter. And it doesn't matter what grouping it is. Every state needs to understand that this weapon should not exist in this world of ours, because if they are used again, it's going to be catastrophic. What was used in 1945, the kind of weapons that we have now are 5,000 times more powerful than what was used, and you cannot imagine the impact that it will have. And we've seen what globalization has done. COVID could not be restrained, and now we think that we can restrain nuclear. It's the impact of nuclear weapons. I think it's just not possible. So say it loud and clear, and hopefully at the G7 this will be said loud and clear in Tokyo very soon. So I'll stop there, and then I'll start. Maybe Cindy and Natalie would like to take it.
Yeah, I'd love to follow on from that, actually. I think that the P5 and the other states who currently have nuclear weapons are wedded to keeping them, and it will be a very, very hard fight. But what we've seen in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is we've seen smaller states saying, this is not in our interest, and this is not in the global interest. And for me, the point of leverage is likely to be the states that are supposedly protected by the nuclear umbrella, in quotes, but who don't have nuclear weapons themselves, standing up and saying, we now understand that this makes us a target, and that these nuclear weapons are more likely to be used against us than to protect us. And we don't want to be under that umbrella anymore. And I think those states, so-called middle powers in some circles, are the ones who really can make the difference here. As long as nuclear weapons are seen as a sign of power, it's going to be a very, very hard fight. It's one I think we're going to win. I think TPNW is incredibly promising, but it's going to be very difficult. I'm going to go back to the funding issue with respect to students and job prospects. I have students who want to work in public interest careers who literally can't afford to. They have to go take the jobs with, the Booz Allen Hamiltons of the world in order to make the money to pay back their student loans. We've got to set up structures that give these students and young people alternatives. And for IANSA, it's incredibly difficult. Our full-time staff is 3 people, right? I'm a volunteer. So that's a situation where I can't say, yeah, we've got 4 openings or 90. We don't. We do work in partnership with groups like New York University to try and give opportunities to students. But we don't have the funding and the leverage to do much more than that. I got into this because I was a summer intern on Capitol Hill, and my boss was on the House Armed Services Committee, and a proposed weapon sale to Jordan came up, and his defense staffer had his hands full and didn't want to deal with arms trade. So as a summer intern, I wound up helping with the congressman's opposition to that sale to Jordan. And that's how I got interested in this stuff. But I'm also a Vietnam War baby. My brother was draft age. And so that's the kind of thing that does tend to concentrate the mind. But it's been challenging. I will not claim this has been a secure career. I have the privilege of having a spouse who's a software engineer. And that's made a difference in my ability to have the career that I've had. And it really shouldn't be that way.
Brilliant. Yeah, I was just going to say, and Cindy, just before you give your answer, we've only got really just 5 minutes left. But actually, I think this is a fantastic point, which I'd like to launch off of, this idea of with the intersection with careers, because I think there's also a misguided idea that you just need to work in like a non-governmental organization to be able to interact with arms control. And no, I mean, you mentioned, for example, this legal case looking at arms transfers or arms control. There should be definitely some encouragement, even through mainstream companies, to get involved in the different ways that they can, or those opportunities to get involved should be made, should be created. Those new markets, as it were, those new job markets, those new job roles should definitely be created to encourage a mainstreaming almost of careers in disarmament. And actually something we're going to be looking at our next webinar, I believe the next one or the one after, is disarmament technology. And the role that, or the idea that you can also have industry working towards, anti-arms technology, and not in the conventional idea we have of like anti-missile missiles, but literally in demining technology, and the opportunities perhaps this could unleash for people looking to have maybe careers that link passions with software, something that they might not conventionally see as being related to disarmament, and finding these avenues where they can get involved in creating this difference, making an impact, and implementing these ideas behind the laws, the humanitarian laws that exist. So that's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to maybe seeing some of you there as well. And again, reminder to our viewers, if you just keep following our work here at Scrap, you will be able to join those conversations and we'll be able to learn together. But if you had any closing words, I guess, Cindy, or if you wanted to add in, because I'm aware I want you to maybe like put in the control arms part as well there before we wrap up.
Sure, I'll try to be brief. So one thing I want to just point out from what both you and Natalie and Fahad have been talking about is really just this idea of, and Monalisa as well, of this intersectionality. And not only does that apply to the work, the actual work that we do, and it is something that I think is growing and growing in importance, and it's always been important, but it's growing in sort of its influence, is also the intersectionality with regard to careers. If you see, there isn't sort of a path to work in disarmament. I mean, you can come at it from so many different angles. Just briefly, since I guess it was probably high school, but definitely college, I was really focused on international human rights and humanitarian law. And that has been my focus for my academic career, and pretty much, for my throughout. I then, after law school, for reasons that could be pretty obvious, is that I had to pay back my student loans. I went into a big law firm, and I got incredible experience being in the private sector. I was able to think about certain clients and what I was doing and sort of the pros and cons of that. And I think that was really interesting and kind of was a formative experience in terms of where I wanted to bring my career. I always had in the back of my mind that I'll do this for a little while, pay off my loans, and then I'll go into public international law. One of the things that I did and that's actually what I did, but what was critical to that was pro bono work that I did. So I had to make time during, and the first, if you have any legal scholars listening to this, if you work at a law firm, it's going to be very challenging to do anything extra because it's a very, very intense work environment. But ultimately, after your first, keep in touch with your professors, keep in touch with the context that you make in your academic career. And then when you do have the time, offer that time and make it available. And that's actually how I came across some work that I've done at the UN with the Public International Law and Policy Group, and ultimately how I came to be connected with Control Arms. And it's really just keeping those connections alive and being open to opportunities, and to make a couple sacrifices of a day here, a day here, a vacation day here, a vacation day there, to really get these kinds of experiences that really sort of propel you into being able to make the switch. So that's sort of how I got there. But the one thing I would say for Control Arms is we're sort of in Natalie's camp, which is we have a very small staff, but we do appreciate interns, and we have interns not necessarily throughout the year, but when we can manage them. And I can definitely say that if you're an intern at Control Arms, you'll get substantive work because there's a lot of it, and we give you a lot of sort of independence and capability to kind of take things in the direction that you'd like to do. And we're very cognizant of making that experience what you want and getting the things that you want out of it, and also helping us with our work going forward. I'll stop there because I know we're late.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Monalisa.
And I just, last thing is, it is you, it is the youth, and it's you that need to make this intersectionality a reality. And that is something that we at Control Arms are trying to focus more on youth, because that is where the power is. So thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, speakers. That concludes the Q&A and also brings us to the end of the webinar. We would like to thank our audience for their questions and also for attending. And we offer a special thank you to all the speakers for their very thought-provoking and insightful presentations. Thank you all and have a great day ahead.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
And thank